Hi, I'm Matt Landsman, a board certified criminal defense attorney here in Florida. Today, I want to break down a high profile case that's making national headlines, the federal prosecution of Sean Diddy Combs, and to help you understand how the process with him compares to Florida's criminal justice system. Now, this is more than a celebrity drama case. This case highlights important legal principles that affect how justice is administered at both the state and federal level. So, first things first, Diddy's charges. What are they? Sean Combs, better known as Diddy, has been charged in federal court with human sex trafficking and racketeering. Now, these are incredibly serious federal crimes, and while the charges may seem extreme, and unusual, RICO charges, racketeering in Florida, and generally are referred to as RICO, RICO laws. RICO laws are not uncommon, even in state level prosecutions, certainly, especially here in Florida. Now, in Florida, racketeering charges, also known as RICO, often involve drug trafficking charges or organized fraud rings. Those are the two most common you'll see in Florida, drugs and fraud. The key difference between federal and Florida prosecutions is who's prosecuting and what court it's in. Those are going to be the main differences between what you're seeing with Diddy and what you see in the state of Florida. Now, the penalties for either place are huge. They're usually the equivalent of life in prison for somebody who's convicted of charges like this. So that's what's important to know about the general concept of what Diddy is being charged with and how that compares with Florida. So far, it's pretty similar. So the first thing that they've gone through in the Diddy trial that's really been clear is the jury selection that was covered at the beginning of the week. So first difference between what's happening with Diddy versus what could happen to somebody here in Florida is the size of the jury. There's a difference between what's happening with the federal trial in Manhattan versus what would happen here in Florida in state court. So let's talk about the jury. In Diddy's trial, 12 jurors have been selected, and the judge has allowed six alternates to be seated as well. That's a full box watching the jury on a daily basis of 18 people. Now that's standard in federal court for major felony cases, not the six alternates, but the 12 jurors. That's normal for jury selection in federal court. Now, the alternates are there in case one of the 12 can't complete the trial due to illness, misconduct, some sort of outside influence, a problem, just absence, unforeseen absence, things like that. So that's what the alternates are for. And for a very long trial, that makes sense to have a lot of people present in case somebody's in a car accident or there's something like that. Now, in federal and state court, the jury has to be unanimous. That means they all have to agree to a verdict. And in Florida state court, it's what's going on with the number of jurors is very different. So under Florida statute 913.10, now most felony trials are only going to require six jurors in state court in here in Florida. Now, unless it's a capital case, usually means they're trying to execute somebody generally. Uh, there's also some exceptions for that in terms of what's capital, but generally federal 12, state of Florida 6. That's half the number of jurors compared to federal court. And fewer jurors generally means fewer people the prosecution would need to convince. That's a major factor in how the trial is going to be conducted in terms of like what is required for reasonable doubt. It's the same standard. However, in federal court, you have 12 people who have to all agree to what's going on. In Florida, it would be easier, but that's so in Florida, the it's easier to get a conviction in the sense of getting people to all agree because there's only six generally. Another thing that kind of got glossed over in some of the media coverage about the jury selection is that it was announced that the jury was sworn almost immediately. Now, people say the jury was sworn in to hear the case, or what does that mean if they're sworn in? Another point to understand, it has to do with jeopardy attaching. So a lot of people have heard of something called double jeopardy, a right enshrined in the Constitution. So this point to understand, jeopardy attaches, like the danger of the trial attaches or it starts once the jury is sworn in. Now, that's true in federal and Florida courts. Now, that means that if the jury is sworn and the trial begins, and then something goes wrong, or there's either a mistrial or the jury can't reach a verdict or something like that, there are circumstances when there can be a proper retrial where, like for example, like a hung jury or the defense request to mistrial or something like that. But there are circumstances where an acquittal or some sort of like improper type of mistrial where the defendant can be protected against being tried again under the double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And there's also those protections in the Florida Constitution as well. So when you hear that Diddy's jurors have been sworn in, you now know that the legal clock about what has to happen to him is ticking. It is started and it should be final. Uh, so that's what has to do with double jeopardy. It's something that's been not covered in some of the media stories. Uh, and lastly, as far as jury selection goes and what happened with Diddy, let's look at the voir dire or the jury selection, right? So it's basically like the questioning of the jurors in the presence of all the parties. So in Diddy's trial, you will notice that the judge in the case personally questioned the jurors. So the parties, the state and defense, they don't get up and speak to the jurors personally. Now, the judge doing the questions, that's a method used in some states and in federal court. So, but every state is different. This is known as a judge-led voir dire. It's often used to control the process and limit the amount of time that the entire process will take. Now, in Florida, compared with the federal system, in Florida, it's different. Under Florida, and specifically Florida Rule of Criminal Procedure 3.300, attorneys, not the judge, they have the right to directly question the jurors. Now, this allows both sides to assess biases more thoroughly and make intelligent decisions about peremptory challenges and challenges for cause. Now, I'll explain to what those are. But that's what the purpose is of what lawyers are going to get to do when they challenge jurors and when they question jurors. But that's generally the lawyers do it in Florida courts, not in federal court. So here, the questionnaires were submitted to the jury by the court, usually with input from the defense and the state beforehand. The jurors answer questions in written format. They provide it to the judge and the parties, and the judge will ask questions in addition in open court. So that's basically the beginning of the process. The last thing to know, or one of the last things to know about jury selection and what happened in Diddy's trial, is what are the lawyers looking for? And you can get some insight into what the lawyers are trying to determine from the jurors by the questions or what are being asked. So, what kind of questions are being asked? In Diddy's case, jurors were questioned about their attitudes towards law enforcement, media exposure related to the case, and personal experiences and potential biases. And now these questions, they are not just for show. These are designed to uncover any prejudice that might make a juror unable to decide the case fairly. So if a juror, for example, shows bias towards law enforcement, that was like one of the topics being covered. If they showed bias toward law enforcement in favor of them, for example, that could be a reason to challenge that juror for cause, which would allow them to be stricken by the parties. The same goes for jurors who've been influenced by news coverage or social media posts. Now that and social media and media is a huge issue in high profile cases. If a juror has seen coverage that could affect their judgment, they may be excused from serving for cause. And that means, for example, if they've been shown evidence from the media, that is evidence that's been shown to them without a judge determining if it was lawful to show them that evidence or not. If it's improper to one of the sides, it could be some information that doesn't get admitted into court by the end of the trial. And that juror has been influenced by some piece of evidence or argument, which may be impermissible in the law, or it can be just something that deprives one of the parties of the opportunity to challenge it. And when you rely on media coverage for determining your opinions and being influenced, it can essentially make you an improper juror because you've been kind of tainted by that information you've been exposed to, which in a courtroom, it can be controlled, where all the parties get to see the evidence and challenge it piece by piece and determine if it's fair. And then the argument, same thing with the arguments from that evidence, they can determine if it's fair and if it's appropriate to be introduced in court. Now, after jury selection, jurors are instructed, and you'll see this in the media coverage. They say that this occurred. The jurors get instructed to avoid the media coverage, not talk about the case, and not do their own research. And that standard is going to be the same in federal and Florida courts. And the goal is the same, is to ensure that there is a verdict reached just on the evidence presented in court and not on rumors, headlines, or opinions. That's really not appropriate. So if uh, these are kind of some of the differences and similarities between uh, Diddy's trial versus how things would occur in Florida, and if you know the difference, you can help understand uh, what Florida law is and how it applies to everyone here. So it's critical to understand your case, if you've been accused of anything, how your case, but also the other trials and things you see in the media. So I hope this has been helpful. Matt Landsman, Landsman Law, for you.